Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and in this review I'll be taking a deep dive into the movie mode of the Panasonic Lumix S5, a mid-range full-frame mirrorless camera with 24 megapixels, built-in stabilization, twin card slots, a fully articulated touchscreen, and 10-bit 4K video up to 60p. Now this video complements my main S5 review, which covers the physical, control and compositional side of the camera, as well as its photo quality and features. I've decided to split them into two as there's just so much to cover, but if you're a video or hybrid shooter, you should definitely watch them both, as I won't be repeating the physical details here. Just briefly though, the S5 costs £1,800 or $2,000 for the body alone, making it the most affordable, not to mention the most compact model in the Lumix S series to date. But don't let that fool you, as the video specs go way beyond most rivals, or indeed many cameras costing half as much again. In fact, as you'll learn, the S5 can be considered a full-frame GH5 or a mini S1H, making it a very tempting option for pro videographers who can't stretch to that model or who want a B camera with matched footage. Right, let's get on with it, and as a teaser, there will not be any overheating to worry about, even in the absence of fans or vents. Before diving into the video quality menus, I'll quickly mention some physical highlights for video shooters. The S5 is the first Lumix S body with a side-hinged fully articulated touchscreen. It includes 3.5mm mic and headphone jacks, as well as USB-C for data, charging and power, or for using it as a webcam. And while the HDMI port is the annoying micro size, an upcoming firmware update will at least allow it to output 5.9K RAW to an Atomos Ninja 5, just like the S1H. There's twin SD card slots, and you can record video in any format to both simultaneously, and while the smaller body necessitated a smaller battery pack, it still got me around 2 hours of 4K video or 2.5 hours of 1080p in my tests. Right, now onto those video modes. I'm showing you the menus for the MOV format, first in PAL and then in NTSC, but the highlights are being able to record uncropped 4K from 24 to 30p internally at up to 10-bit 422. If you're shooting 10-bit 4K internal, clips are limited to half an hour each, but I managed to record 4 consecutive ones on a single charge without any need to cool down and no overheating issues. If you switch to 8-bit 4K and frame rates up to 30p, you can actually record for as long as your battery and card will allow. I managed a single clip of 4K 25p lasting an hour and 57 minutes using a 128GB card before the battery ran out, and again with no overheating. In 1080p, I managed over 2.5 hours in a single clip, so it's ideal for events or interviews. The S5 also becomes the first full framer at its price point to offer 4K at 50 or 60p, albeit with an APS-C crop. Again, you can record in 8 or 10-bit, although both are in 420 when recorded internally. 4K 50-60p clips are all limited to half an hour each, although again I managed to record 4 consecutive clips on a single charge without overheating, and also while recording to both cards simultaneously. Take that, Canon! While 4K at 50 or 60p is always cropped to the APS-C format, it's also possible to apply an APS-C or an even tighter 1:1 pixel crop for the other modes if desired. Now Panasonic could have stopped there, but generously decided to include a bunch of features from higher-end models that will delight videographers, starting with the impressive inclusion of a waveform monitor, which you can also drag around the screen by touch. Waveform monitors are like advanced histograms, revealing the tonal range for different parts of the frame, as opposed to the entire image in one go. There's also support for anamorphic modes, which use special lenses to squeeze a wide aspect ratio into a 4:3 shape for recording, before being de-squeezed later during presentation. Graders will appreciate full Vlog being installed as standard, and you're watching an ungraded clip filmed in Vlog right now. Vlog records a very flat image that's ideal for grading and colour correction, while also sporting an extended dynamic range for tonal adjustments, and on some earlier models it required a paid firmware update, but here it's included for free. For comparison, here's the same scene recorded using the standard profile, and notice how the high contrast has irretrievably crushed most of the shadow detail under the pier. If you fancy a broader range without the effort of grading, you can also try the HLG mode seen here, which has saved some of the shadow detail as well as bringing back some highlight tones in the sky. There's no RAW video at the time I made this review, but Panasonic has promised it on a free firmware update by the end of 2020, and like the Lumix S1H seen here, it'll deliver 5.9K RAW over HDMI to an optional Atomos Ninja 5 that will then record it in the Apple ProRes RAW format. I made a video all about this on the S1H if you'd like to know more. This update also supports 3.5K RAW for anamorphic, as well as equipping the camera with the wider Cinema 4K video format, a vector scope display, master pedestal adjustments, and the option to switch shutter speed for angle, all highly viable features for pro videographers, and again way beyond the facilities of other full framers at this price point. Okay, that's enough for specs. How about some actual footage, starting with the S5 filming 1080 25p with the Lumix S2060. I'm going to keep the focal length unchanged here to illustrate any differences in coverage. Remember, 1080 is available in 8-bit 420 or 10-bit 422. Next, here's 4K at 25p, which between 24 and 30p is uncropped and available in 8-bit 420 for unlimited recording times, or in 10-bit 422 for half-hour clips, and again, you can just keep filming those until your battery runs out. Next, here's 4K at 50p, which at 50 or 60p incurs an APS-C crop, and is available in 8 or 10-bit, both at 420 for half-hour clips. If you want 4K 50 or 60p in 10-bit 422, you can record it externally. Now let's look at the different frame options in 4K up to 30p, first returning to the uncropped full frame mode. And now in the optional APS-C crop mode without changing the lens. And finally in the 1:1 pixel crop mode, again without changing the focal length. Moving on, here's a clip I filmed in 4K at 50p played at normal speed. One of the benefits of 50 or 60p is being able to apply a minor slowdown, here playing back at 25p for half speed without any loss of quality. Set the S5 to the S&Q mode and you can access higher frame rates for 1080 that are slowed automatically in camera to the desired frame rate, in this case all to 25p. Now there's also no sound recorded in S&Q. Here's a clip filmed in 1080 120p, which is the fastest that's uncropped and still supports continuous autofocus. This represents a 4.8 times slowdown at 25p. Next, here's 1080 at 150p for a 6 times slowdown at 25p, still uncropped, but now with manual focus only. And finally, here's 1080 at the fastest 180p speed for a 7.2 times slowdown when played at 25p, albeit now not only in manual focus, but with a crop too. Next, let's have a look at the S5 filming 4K 25p at high sensitivities. First at 1600 ISO, then 3200 ISO, 6400 ISO, 12800 ISO, 25600 ISO, and 51200 ISO. I'd say the S5 is able to deliver very usable results at high ISOs. Now for a quick rolling shutter test. First here with the S5 being swung side to side rather vigorously in 4K at 25p. And now in 1080 at 25p. Now there's some visible skewing. I'd rank the S5 here roughly middle of the pack. There are some that are better, but some that are considerably worse. Although interestingly, if you go to my photo review of the S5, its electronic shutter for photos is far more susceptible to rolling shutter than it is for video. Now for some clips demonstrating the benefits of stabilization for video, starting with one where all stabilization is disabled. This was filmed at 60mm using the unstabilized 20-60mm zoom. Next, here's the same composition with built-in sensor shift stabilization, or IBIS for short, and that's enabled, and the difference is dramatic, making handheld video with unstabilized lenses very practical. Now for IBIS with the optional electronic stabilization applied from the same distance. And finally, IBIS with electronic and the optional Boost IS mode, all enabled at the same time for the maximum effect. I'll show these while walking in just a moment. Moving on to autofocus, here's the S5 with a single AF area automatically pulling focus between the foreground and background as the composition changes. As you know, the S5 employs a contrast-based system, but Panasonic claims improvements in confidence, which I think are visible here with little or no hunting as the camera settles on the target each time. Here's another example, this time with the camera fixed and the subject moving around as a product demonstration. That's the S1H I'm showing you, by the way. There may have been a minor hunt as the camera first entered the frame, but from that point on, the S5's autofocus actually does a pretty good job at refocusing as I move the subject around. The focus speed may be quite leisurely here and also takes a moment to catch up, but again it's doing it without the distracting hunting of previous models for a look of almost relaxed confidence. I should add the phase detector autofocus of my normal filming camera, the Sony a6400, while more responsive, is not immune to hunting at times. Based on this clip, I'd certainly be happy to use the S5 for product demos. Okay, but what if the subject is a person? In this test with the Lumix S2060 set to 28mm f4 and the camera using face tracking, keep an eye on the lights in the background for any telltale pulsing as well as the focusing on my face. Like the previous example, there's a small pause before the S5 refocuses on me, but once it does, it sticks much better than previous models with little to no pulsing in the background. Now, Canon and Sony remain best of all if you need to stay perfectly focused on a subject that's in constant motion, but I'd feel fairly confident using the S5 to film pieces to camera or interviews in a mostly static studio environment. But how about vlogging? Before my final verdict, let's find out.
Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is a quick vlogging test with the Panasonic Lumix S5. I'm filming this in 1080p without any stabilization, so let's fix that straight away. Right, now that's sorted, we can continue. So I'm filming this with the S5 in 1080 25p with the built-in sensor shift stabilization, or IBIS for short. There are some of the stabilization modes I'll show you in just a minute, but let's start with this one, again in 1080p. I'm filming this with the Lumix S20 to 60mm lens, which is likely to be the kit zoom for this model. As I've said earlier on, I really like this lens. It goes a lot wider than most kit zooms. I mean, 20mm on full frame. If I hold the camera out at arm's length, you really can see that I'm pretty small on the frame. This is great. If your vlogging is more about the actual surroundings and less about the person, just making sure I don't get run over by any mountain bikers while I'm in the forest here. If you see anyone, you will let me know, won't you? Anyway, I'm filming this at 20mm f3.5, so this is the kind of depth of field that you can expect. And I'm also filming at a fairly motion-friendly shutter speed of a 50th of a second for my 25p frame rate. Okay, I'm going to switch to 4K now and see how that looks. Right, now I've switched to 4K at 25p. Can you see a difference in detail? I would hope so, because I've checked the results from the Lumix S5, and because it's based internally on the S1H, the video quality is actually very, very good on it. And you can film 4K at 420 8-bit, as I am doing now, but you can also film it internally in 422 10-bit up to 30p, or you can switch to 4K at 50 or 60p, although those do incur an APS-C sized crop. But it is full frame if you're filming at 4K up to 30p, and the footage can look really nice. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are a bunch of different stabilization modes, so let's try them out. On the previous clip, you were seeing sensor shift IBIS stabilization working by itself, but now I've enabled electronic digital stabilization from the menus, and you're seeing that working alongside IBIS. So this is two technologies working together. Do you think it is providing an additional layer of stabilization for the walking and talking vloggers among us? Let me know what you think. I should also say that I have fixed the shutter speed and the aperture, and I'm using auto ISO to film this as always, but it's a bit dimmer than normal. So if you're comparing this to some of my earlier clips filmed in this forest on other reviews, do note that those were taken on bright days when the ISO was really about 100 to 400, whereas in this sequence it's really ranging between 800 and 6400 ISO, especially in the really shaded areas, so bear that in mind. Okay, now there's another stabilization option, so let's put it on and see how it looks. Okay, the next option I've enabled here is Boost IS. So right now you're seeing the S5 with Boost IS, E-stabilization and sensor shift IBIS. Now there's so many different combinations, I'm not going to go through all of them here, but you can see the various different options that are on offer. Now I think Boost IS may work best with a static subject. So I'm going to stop walking for a moment and just have a little look around this forest and see what you think. Now in terms of audio, you will have already seen my Rode Wireless Go on my collar. No surprises there. I filmed a clip earlier inside one of Brighton's malls using the built-in microphones. And the sound quality from the built-in mics is pretty good, but you could hear the autofocusing on this lens. It was funny because you can't actually hear it at all when you're just using this lens in person, in normal use, but in video, it certainly picked up the sound of it, along with the strap lugs rattling a bit on the side, which was a bit annoying. Also, in terms of functionality, I should mention that Panasonic has been considerate enough to place the microphone input at the top of the ports, so the mic input itself does clear the flip screen. However, it shares a flap with the headphone jack below it, so you have to open that one flap for the two ports, and that flap is just covering the top corner of the screen. Not much, but it does make you think, really? Couldn't they have done two flaps? I think if I owned the S5 and it was bothering me, I might actually take a craft knife to that rubber flap and turn it into two. but it's not really affecting my view of the screen. And of course, with a fully articulated flip screen, I can see myself very, very clearly here. So it is a really nice camera for vlogging. Right, I'm going to change one of the other settings now. All right, guess what setting I've changed it to now? I have actually disabled IBIS, no longer using sensor shift. I've turned off Boost IS as well. This is just electronic stabilization only. Now you might think you'd be crazy. You've got a camera with IBIS and you've switched it off. Well, that's because IBIS sometimes doesn't work that well when you're walking and talking like this, especially if you start panning around and looking at the scene. However, electronic stabilization sometimes works a lot better for this. So let's see how these look, because it is a fairly wide lens, 20mm. And just finally, as a direct comparison, I've now switched off all of the electronic digital stabilization and returned to sensor shift IBIS only. So I'd love to hear what you think, which combination or which technology working by itself is providing the best result for handheld vlogging. I'd also love to hear what you think of the autofocus during all of these video clips, because as you know, the S5 continues to use Panasonic's contrast-based DFD autofocus system, which has pros and cons compared to the phase detect system used by most of its rivals. Now, Panasonic frequently claims that it has improved the autofocus capability on its cameras, whether it's in terms of speed, confidence, stickiness, reliability. And you've seen lots of examples now, so I'd like to hear what you think. Is DFD working sufficiently well on models like the S5 for you to use it confidently in situations like this? Right, I think I've vlogged enough. I've managed to avoid the mountain bikers and the dogs. In fact, there's not a great deal of people out today. It's been quite nice. A little later in the day, without too much harsh light. In fact, it's a really nice testing vlogging in this environment because there isn't any harsh light shining on my face. It does make for slightly nicer looking video, I think. Right, anyway, that's enough of that little ramble chat. Now it's time to get on with the rest of the review.
So in my vlogging test, the S5 lost me more than a few times when I looked down or turned away to avoid tripping up, but always locked back on again without too much fuss. Now Sony or Canon, at least Canon models with dual pixel AF, are more confident in this scenario, so you have to decide what kind of subjects you'll be filming and how much they'll be moving. Overall though, the Lumix S5 becomes one of the best full-frame cameras for videographers with less than $2,000 or pounds to spend, and in fact sports many features not seen on cameras costing a great deal more. No other full-frame camera at this price offers unlimited, uncropped 4K up to 30p, nor 4K up to 60p or in 10-bit. And at a time when the EOS R5 and R6 continue to lack dual card recording and have only just acquired zebra patterns, the Lumix S5 gives you recording to both cards simultaneously in any format, as well as a waveform monitor and even support for anamorphic video. The quality is, as you'd expect for a sensor inherited from the flagship S1H, very good indeed, and graders will love that Panasonic includes the full vlog built into the S5 as standard without having to pay extra. In fact, my overwhelming feeling about using the S5 for video is just how much of the S1H is present here at half the price. What's not to like? Well, the viewfinder panel at 2.36 million dots is looking a little low res for 2020, albeit comparable to similarly priced or cheaper full framers. The switch to micro HDMI feels at odds to the otherwise pro video spec. As for autofocus, Panasonic has certainly improved DFD to a point where it will successfully refocus on a subject that's moved without hunting back and forth, but often required a slight pause in my test to catch up with any changes. Now this is fine for interviews, pieces to camera, and even some product demonstrations, but if your subject is in constant motion or you're vlogging and you want to be sharp at all times, I found Sony and Canon remain more responsive and confident. But at this price, Sony doesn't offer a flip screen, and Canon will only beat the S5's video focusing in 1080p using the EOS R or RP, neither of which offer uncropped 4K, dual card slots or IBIS. If you want to match the S5's uncropped 4K quality with a Canon camera that also has IBIS and twin card slots, then you're looking at buying the R5 or R6, which both cost much more and suffer from overheating. And if you want 10-bit 4K from Sony, you'll need to splurge on the A7S Mark III. Now the A7S III of course offers much more besides for videographers, including uncropped 4K 60p and even 4K 120 with only a minor reduction in the field of view, but there's a big price difference between these cameras. If you have $2,000 or less to spend on a full-frame camera, the Lumix S5 simply becomes one of the most capable models on the market for video and comes highly recommended for pro videographers. Check out my separate review of the photo and physical side of the camera for the complete story behind the Lumix S5, and as always there's links in the description and pinned comment for anyone who fancies treating me to a coffee or treating themselves to my book or some Camera Labs merchandise. As always, don't forget one of the best ways you can support my work is to like and especially to subscribe, and both are free of charge, so what are you waiting for? Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.